I shall expect them to answer for my soul if I can't get a chance of saving it." Several of the men applauded this till Jerry said, "That may sound well enough, but it won't do. Every man must look after his own soul. You can't lay it at another man's door like a foundling and expect him to take care of it. Don't you see? If you are always sitting on your box waiting for a fare, they will say, 'If we don't take him, someone else will, and he does not look out for any Sunday.' Of course, they don't go to the bottom of it, or they would see, if they never came for a cab, it would be no use your standing there. But people don't always like to go to the bottom of things. It may not be convenient to do it. But if you Sunday drivers would strike for a day of rest, the thing would be done." "And what would all the good people do if they could not get to their favorite preachers?" said Larry. "'Tis not for me to lay down plans for other people," said Jerry. "But if they can't walk so far, they can go to what is nearer. And if it should rain, they can put on their mackintoshes as they do on a weekday. If a thing is right, it can be done. And if a thing is wrong, it can be done without. And a good man will find a way. And that is as true for us cabmen as it is for the churchgoers." 2 or 3 weeks after this, as we came into the yard late evening one day, Polly came running across the road with a lantern. She always brought it to him, if we're not very wet. "It has come out all right, Jerry. Mrs. Briggs sent her servant this afternoon to ask you to take her out tomorrow at 11 o'clock, I said. "Yes, I thought so, but we suppose she employed someone else now." "Well," says he, "the fact of the matter is, Master was put out when Mr. Barker refused to come out on Sundays, and he has been trying other cabs, but there's something wrong with them all. Some drive too fast and some too slow, and the mistress says there is no one of them so nice and clean as yours, and nothing will suit her but Mr. Barker's cab again." Polly was almost out of breath, and Jerry broke out in a merry laugh. "All come right some day or night. You were right, my dear. You generally are. Run in and get the supper, and I'll have Jack's harness off and make him snug and happy in no time." After this, Mrs. Briggs wanted Jerry's cab quite as often as before, never, however, on a Sunday. But there came a day when we had Sunday work, and this is how it happened. We'd all come home on the Saturday night very tired, and very glad to think that the next day would be all rest. But it was not to be so. On Sunday morning, Jerry was cleaning me in the yard when Polly stepped up to him looking very full of something. "What is it?" said Jerry. "Well, my dear," she said, "poor Dinah Brown just had a letter brought to say that her mother is dangerously ill, and that she must go directly if she wishes to see her alive. The place is more than 10 miles away from here, out in the country, and she says if she takes the train, she will still have 4 miles to walk. And so weak as she is, and the baby only 4 weeks old. Of course that would be impossible, and she wants to know if you would take her in your cab, and she promises to pay you faithfully as she can get the money." "Tut, tut. We'll see about that." It was not the money I was thinking about, but of losing our Sunday. The horses are tired, and I am tired too. That's where it pinches. "It pinches all around, for that matter," said Polly. "But it's only half Sunday without you. But you know, we should do to other people as we should like them to do to us. I know very well what I should like if my mother was dying, and Jerry dear, I'm sure it won't break the Sabbath, for if pulling a poor beast or donkey out of a pit would not spoil it, I am quite sure taking poor Dinah would not." "Why, Polly, you are as good as a minister, and so I've had my Sunday morning sermon early today. You may go and tell Dinah that I'll be ready for her as the clock strikes 10. But stop. Just step round to Butcher Braden's with my compliments and ask him if he would lend me his light trap. I know he never uses it on Sunday, and it would make a wonderful difference to the horse." As she went, and soon returned, saying that he could have the trap and welcome. "All right," said he. "Now, put me up a bit of bread and cheese, and I'll be back in the afternoon as soon as I can." "And I'll have the meat pie ready for an early tea instead of for dinner," said Polly, and away she went, while he made his preparations to the tune of "Polly's the Woman," and no mistake, of which tune he was very fond. I was selected for the journey, and at 10 o'clock we started in a light, high-wheeled gig, which ran so easily that after the four-wheeled cab it seemed like nothing. It was a fine May day, and as soon as we were out of the town, the sweet air, the smell of the fresh grass, and the soft country roads were as pleasant as they used to be in the old times. And I soon began to feel quite fresh. Dinah's family lived in a small farmhouse up a green lane close to a meadow with some fine shady trees. There were 2 cows feeding in it. The young man asked Jerry to bring his trap into the meadow, and he would tie me up in the cowshed. He wished he had a better stable to offer. "If your cows would not be offended," said Jerry, "there's nothing my horse would like so well as to have an hour or 2 in your beautiful meadow. He's quiet, and it would be a rare treat for him." "Do, and welcome," said the young man. "The best we have is at your service for your kindness to my sister. We shall be having some dinner in an hour, and I hope you will come in, though with mother so ill, we are all out of sorts in the house." Jerry thanked him kindly, but said he had some dinner with him. There was nothing he should like so well as walking about in the meadow. When my harness was taken off, I did not know what I should do first, whether to eat grass, or roll over on my back, or lie down and rest, or have a gallop across the meadow out of sheer spirits of being free. And I did all by turns. Jerry seemed quite as happy as I was. He sat down by a bank under a shady tree and listened to the birds. Then he sang himself and read out of the little brown book he was so fond of, and then wandered round the meadow and down by a little brook where he picked the flowers and the hawthorn and tied them up in long sprays of ivy. Then he gave me a good feed of the oats which he had brought with him, but the time seemed all too short. I had not been in a field since I left poor Ginger at Earlshall. We came home gently, and Jerry's first words were, as we came into the yard, "Well, Polly, I have not lost my Sunday after all, for the birds were singing hymns in every bush, and I joined in the service. As for Jack, he was like a young colt. When he handed Dolly the flowers, she jumped about for joy." The winter came in early, with a great deal of cold and wet. There was snow, or sleet, or rain, almost every day of the weeks, changing only for keen driving winds or sharp frosts. The horses all felt it very much. When it was a dry cold, a couple of good thick rugs will keep the warmth in us, but when it is a soaking rain, they soon get wet through, and are no good. Some of the drivers had a waterproof cover to throw over, which was a fine thing, but some of the men were so poor that they could not protect either themselves or their horses, and many of them suffered very much that winter. When we horses worked half the day, we went to our dry stables and could rest, while they had to sit on their boxes, sometimes staying out as late as 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, if they had a party to wait for. When the streets were slippery with frost or snow, this was the worst of all for us horses. 1 mile of such traveling, with a weight to draw and no firm footing, would take more out of us than 4 on a good road. Every nerve and muscle of our bodies is on the strain to keep our balance. And added to this, the fear of falling is more exhausting than anything else. If the roads are very bad, indeed, our shoes are rough, but that makes us nervous at first. When the weather was very bad, many of the men would go in and sit in the tavern close by. and get someone to watch for them. But they often lost a fare that way, and could not, as Jerry said, be there without spending money. He never went to the Rising Sun. That was the name of the tavern. There was a coffee shop near, where he now and then went. Or he bought of an old man who came to our rank with tins of hot coffee and pies. It was his opinion that spirits and beer made a man colder afterwards, and that dry clothes, good food, cheerfulness, and a comfortable wife at home were the best things to keep a cabman warm. Polly always supplied him with something to eat when he could not get home, and sometimes he would see little Dolly peeping from the corner of the street to make sure if father was on the stand. If she saw him, she would run off at full speed and soon come back with something in a tin or basket, some hot soup or pudding that Polly had made. It was wonderful how such a little thing could get safely across the street, often thronged with horses and carriages. But she was a brave little maid, and felt it quite an honor to bring father's first course, as he used to call it. She was a general favorite on the stand, and there was not a man who would not have seen her safely across the street if Jerry had not been able to do it. One cold, windy day, Dolly had brought Jerry a basin of something hot, and was standing by while he ate it. He had scarcely begun when a gentleman, walking towards us very fast, held up his umbrella. Jerry touched his hat in return, gave the basin to Dolly, and was taking off his cloth, when the gentleman, hastening up, cried out, "No, no, no! Finish your soup, my friend. I have not much time to spare, but I can wait till you have done and set your girl safe on the pavement." So saying, he seated himself in the cab. Jerry thanked him kindly and came back to Dolly. "There, Dolly, that's a gentleman. That's a real gentleman, Dolly. He has got time and thought for the comfort of a poor cabman and his little girl." Jerry finished his soup, set the child across, and then took his orders to drive to Clapham Rise. Several times after that, the same gentleman took our cab. I think he was very fond of dogs and horses, for whenever we took him to his own door, 2 or 3 dogs would come bounding out to meet him. Sometimes he came round and patted me, saying in his quiet, pleasant way, "This horse has a good master, and he deserves it." It was a very rare thing for anyone to notice the horse that had been working for him. I have known ladies to do it now and then, and this gentleman. And 1 or 2 others have given me a pat or a kind word, but 99 out of 100 would not do anything about it, would as soon think of patting the steam engine that drew the train. This gentleman was not young, and there was a forward stoop in his shoulders, as if he was always going at something. His lips were thin and close shut, though they had a very pleasant smile. His eye was keen. There was something in his jaw and motion of his head that made one think he was very determined in anything he set himself to do. His voice was pleasant and kind. Any horse would trust that voice, though it was just as decided as anything else about him. One day he and another gentleman took our cab. They stopped in at a shop in R Street, and while his friend went in, he stood at the door. A little ahead of us, on the other side of the street, a cart with 2 very fine horses was standing before some wine vaults. The carter was not with them, and I cannot tell how long they had been standing, but they seemed to think they had waited long enough and began to move off. Before they had gone many paces, the carter came running out and caught them. He seemed furious at their having moved, and with whip and rein punished them brutally, even beating them about the head. Our gentleman saw it, and stepped quickly across the street, and said in a decided voice, "If you don't stop that directly, I'll have you summoned for leaving your horses and for brutal conduct." The man, who had been clearly drinking, poured forth some abusive language, but he left off knocking the horses about, and taking the reins got into his cart. Meantime our friend had quietly taken out a notebook from his pocket, and looking at the name and address painted on the cart, he wrote something down. "What do you want with that?" growled the carter, as he cracked his whip and was moving on. A nod and a grim smile was the only answer he got. On returning to the cab, our friend was joined by his companion, who said laughingly, "I should have thought right. You had enough business of your own to look after, without troubling yourself about other people's horses and servants." Our friend stood still for a moment, and throwing his head a little back, he said, "Do you know why this world is as bad as it is?" "No," said the other. "Then I will tell you. It is because people think only about their own business, and won't trouble themselves to stand up for the oppressed, nor bring the wrongdoer to light. I never see a wicked thing like this without doing what I can, and many a master has thanked me for letting him know how his horses have been used." "I wish there were more gentlemen like you, sir," said Jerry, "for they are wanted badly enough in this city." After this we continued our journey, and as they got out of the cab, our friend was saying, "My doctrine is this, that if we see cruelty or wrong that we have the power to stop and do nothing, we make ourselves sharers in the guilt." I should say that for a cab horse I was very well off indeed. My driver was my owner, and it was his interest to treat me well and not overwork me, even had he not been so good a man as he was. But there were a great many horses which belonged to the large cab owners, who let them out to their drivers for so much money a day. As the horses did not belong to these men, the only thing they thought of was how to get their money out of them first, to pay the master, and then to provide for their own living. And a dreadful time some of those horses had of it. Of course, I understood but little, but it was often talked over on the stand, and the governor, who was a kind-hearted man and fond of horses, would sometimes speak up if one came in very much jaded or ill-used. One day, a shabby, miserable-looking driver, who went by the name of Seedy Sam, brought in his horse, looking dreadfully beat. And the governor said, "You and your horse look more fit for the police station than for this rank." The man flung a tattered rug over the horse, turned full round upon the governor, and said in a voice that sounded almost desperate, "If the police have any business with the matter, it ought to be with the masters who charge us so much, or with the fares that are fixed so low. If a man has to pay 18 shillings a day for the use of a cab and 2 horses, as many of us have to do in the season, and must make that up before we earn a penny for ourselves, I say 'tis more than hard work. 9 shillings a day to get out of each horse before you begin to get your own living. I know, you know that's true. And if the horses don't work, we must starve, and I and my children have known what that is before now. I've 6 of 'em, and only one earns anything. I'm on the stand 14 or 16 hours a day, and I haven't had a Sunday these 10 or 12 weeks. You know Skinner never gives a day if he can help it. And if I don't work hard, tell me, who does? I want a warm coat and a mackintosh, but with so many to feed, how can a man manage it? I had to pledge my clock a week ago to pay Skinner, and I shall never see it again." Some of the other drivers stood round, nodding their heads and saying he was right. The man went on, "You that have your own horses and cabs, or drive for good masters, have a chance of getting on, and a chance of doing right. I haven't. We can't charge more than 6 pence a mile after the first within a 4-mile radius. This very morning I had to go a clear 6 miles and only took 3 shillings. I could not get a return fare and had to come all the way back. There's 12 miles for a horse and 3 shillings for me."